All right, this is the second part of the elbow lecture, ligaments and joints. So just to review, the three bones we have involved in the elbow, the humerus, the ulna, the radius, they all come together to form three separate joints. So the first joint you have is the humero-ulnar joint, which is the true elbow joint. It's between the humerus and the ulna. And if you remember, there is that coronoid fossa on the ulna that fits onto the coronoid process of the humerus and allows for the joint to act as a hinge joint. The other two joints are the radiohumeral joint, which again is where the head of the radius will fit into the radial fossa on the humerus, and then the radial-ulnar joint where the head of the radius interacts with there's a little notch cut out in the ulna, and that's where those two come together. It's not a movable joint in the sense that you could isolate that joint, but it's part of what allows the movement in the elbow to occur. Again, we're going to see a capsular ligament in the elbow, just like most of our other major joints. It goes around all three joints. It's really the joint capsule itself. We just designate it as a ligament. It has several portions of it that extend throughout the joint surface and will fuse with the collateral ligaments, can attach to some of the muscular and tendinous structures, and also just onto the bones themselves. Like you can see the distal part of it is going to attach to the olecranon process here. So it's a large ligament. It really encompasses the entire joint. All right, going to the more specific ligaments, we'll start with the radial collateral ligament. If you remember in the knee, we have the lateral collateral ligament. This is acting in the exact same way. So it's gonna resist that varus force coming from medial to lateral, and it's on the lateral side of the elbow right here, coming down from the humerus and onto the ulna there, okay? So that is the lateral collateral ligament. On the medial side, you'll have the ulnar collateral ligament. Most of the time, that's what it's referred to. Otherwise, you would have to designate it as the medial collateral ligament of the elbow. So that's why it's easier to just call it the UCL. You can see it right here. It's actually got three parts, which I'll go over just briefly. An anterior band, transverse band, and posterior band. So it's a pretty sizable ligament. That's because the amount of valgus force we end up with on the elbow is substantial, especially if you're looking at something like a throwing mechanism. There has to be a very strong resistance in order to keep the elbow together with that type of force. So the anterior band is just running here between the medial epicondyle and the medial aspect of the coronoid. The posterior band running between the medial epicondyle and then just the border of the olecranon. And the transverse band, it doesn't really cross the elbow joint. It's just involved in the middle part and connecting the olecranon. You don't need to know those specifically or individually, but I just want you to understand that it's a large ligament and it is there to resist that very strong valgus force. Another ligament that's important in the elbow is called the annular ligament. You can see it right here. It just basically wraps around the head of the radius to hold it in place because there's a lot of rotation happening at that joint. So this is holding it in its appropriate position. So you can see it there on the drawing and then also on this drawing. There's also an interosseous membrane. This is a ligamentous structure, even though it's not called a ligament. It's right here between the radius and ulna. If you remember when we talked about joints a while ago, we had joints that were movable and joints that are not movable, right? So this was a synarthrotic joint or a ligamentous joint between two bones. So you can't actively separate your radius and ulna without an external force. It's really more of a stabilizing structure to keep them together. Same with this guy, the oblique cord. It's right here at the top, kind of at an angle, and it's at the proximal end of the interosseous membrane. And again, it's just keeping those bones from pulling apart. That's not something you want to happen. So we have two ligaments that are supporting that area and keeping those bones in place. A couple other ligaments just at the distal part there. The dorsal radioulnar, which is just on that radioulnar joint, and the volar, same area, so dorsal being on the backside, volar on the front side. Not as important as the other ligaments we just discussed. All right. As far as movements, we'll get into those in the next video.